I'll use a scoopy chisel to make a whole row of initial cuts maybe about that wide or a little bit wider, and then I will just come in with a chisel and take those out. And again, that's really good for getting a nice flat area. The flatter you can get the dead space, the less likely you are to have little ridges that pick up and create chatter, and the less likely you are to get any kind of embossing marks on your lino. So that's large spaces. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is cutting out a brush mark. If you saw my video on marks that you can make on lino, one of the things that we were addressing was actually painting on the lino to make nice brushy marks. When you come to cut them out, it's not really a question of having to exactly follow around every tiny splash of the paint. It's more, I think, about catching the kind of spirit of the paint mark, which sounds a bit fey, but what I mean is the focus on how the brush is moving. So like here, for example, there's a very dynamic movement there. So in my cutting, I've been careful to get that kind of feeling of movement. The other thing about doing something like this is to keep it looking like a brush mark, you need areas where there are some heavy bits of paint. So here, for example, where there's been a lot of paint on the brush, and it's actually, there aren't lots of little twiddly bits, it's actually quite a straight line there, because you need to have both the kind of plainer cutting where the ink is heavier and the fractured cutting where the ink is lighter to get a nice balance. Again, that is something that comes with practice, but it's worth bearing in mind all the time that when you print this, it won't be light and dark and show the shading of the ink. This is going to be inked up as a flat area. So you can't rely on the actual application of the lino ink to look like the ink looks when you put it onto the lino, if you see what I mean. You don't have that sort of areas of thin and areas of thick. It's a more cohesive layer. So you have to kind of say that with your cutting. So here, for example, where there's this kind of bit where there's a brush stroke that goes across the back, I've actually cut more into that than there was a fractured paint, because I need that to read properly when it's a cohesive layer of ink. It'll be easier to show you that once I get to the printing. But as I say, when you're cutting around a painted on layer like this, just try and keep bearing in mind that you want to show movement of the brush and balance fractured areas with heavier areas. So last of all, I just wanted to show you that ink cutting in progress and how I do it. So you see, when I'm clearing out here, I do all my delicate cutting like I showed you here, and then I'm very careful to go around the whole shape and do myself a sort of protective trench, because when I clean out these bigger spaces, it means that this bit's protected and I'm not trying to get near this bit with bigger tools when I'm doing clearing. So there are lots of ways of cutting and lots of approaches, but hopefully that's just given you a bit of insight into how I cut. The last thing I would say is that before you do any printing, always make sure that you give your lino a really, really good brushing, because if you don't, any dust particles or little tiny bits of lino will go onto the roller and you'll end up with little bald spots on your print where the lino's sticking. So I hope that's been helpful, and I'll join you again for another film. Thank you.